We've been looking at the first miracle of Jesus from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, and we spent a little bit of time looking at some of the nuances of the just some of the oddities that we might consider as we think about how this whole thing played out when. Jesus and his disciples and his family are obviously all together at this wedding feast, this gathering, and they have run out of libations, so to speak, in this feast, and just out of the blue, Jesus' mother approaches him and simply says, "They have no wine." Of course, Jesus understands what she means by that. What are you going to do about it? Because his response is, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour is not yet come, or my time is not yet come." And then, without any other statement in the text, Mary just simply turns to the servants and says, "Whatever he tells you to do, do it." And look. One thing we always have to understand is this. Not everything that's said in every situation is recorded. For example, the Sermon on the Mount was far longer than what we have in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Because it can be preached in about 24 minutes. I know because I've done it 100 times. So we know that that's not the entirety of it. In Acts chapter 2, there's a little summary there. And with many other words, he exhorted and testified. So we don't have those words. So we don't know for certain the total extent of this conversation, this exchange between Jesus and Mary. But we do have the pertinence. And she approaches Jesus to solve this problem. And at first he is resistant to such, and without any recorded dialogue, she just simply turns to the servants and says, "Whatever he tells you to do, do it." In other words, she kind of, as we said, she kind of placed an onus on him. Basically, she said, "He's going to tell you to do something. He may be fussing at me." By the way, you ever had a discussion like that at some time with your mother or with your wife or with a child or something, and the conversation doesn't lead to a conclusion that somebody's going to do something, but somebody's going to do something, right? Somebody. Just as an example, if my mom were to ask me to do something, of course, the situation is different now. I'm older, and of course, she's been she's been sick, so there are a lot of things that change. But let's just say when I was in my 30s, all right? When I was in my 30s. And I can remember this specifically sometimes with my grandma Burleson. Something would be said that required some type of action, probably on my part. And I expressed my lack of enthusiasm about getting that thing done. And even without ever verbally agreeing to do it, they knew that it was going to get done because I was going to do it, right? Like it or not, I was going to do it. And so this seems to be a situation like that. That Jesus is, let's just be honest, Jesus is not keen on getting things started right here, right now. And yet, that's exactly what happened, because Jesus was going to do whatever his mother wanted him to do. And we also spent a little time thinking about how did Mary know that Jesus was going to do something? How did she know that Jesus could do something? This is Jesus' first miracle. She's never seen Jesus perform a miracle. Now, we know about the conversation that took place before she conceived. We know about the conversations that took place at his presentation in the temple. We know what happened in Luke chapter 2 at the end of the chapter with Jesus in the temple and speaking to the experts in the law. We know all that, and we know that Mary had witnessed essentially about 30 years of somebody who was unlike anybody else she had ever seen. And thus, knowing the things that had been told to her about Jesus, she knew that he could, and she knew that he would, and so so we know that she knew that. And then there were a couple of statements made I thought that were interesting about the servants. The servants didn't know who Jesus was, right? They didn't know that he could do anything. They had no reason to believe it. And yet she said, whatever he tells you to do, you do it. And so he simply says, fill the water pots full of water. Fill them up full of water. And then they drew out of those. And we don't know exactly when and how all this happened, but we do know this. We know that the servants filled the water pots full of water. And at some point between there and the dinner table, the water was turned into wine. And the Bible says nobody knew where it came from, but the text says, but the servants knew. In other words, without any details as to how it happened, the servants knew that Jesus had done it. They knew that Jesus had done it. It doesn't say how he did it. It doesn't say when he did it. It doesn't say that they drew wine out of the pots into the pitchers, or if they put water in the pitchers and by the time they got from the pitcher to the table. But the Bible says the servants knew it, and so thus Jesus would have been in some way revealed to them in this first miracle, and not just to Mary. But this particular miracle was not done with a great deal of fanfare, was not done with a great deal of witnesses, and so we find that Jesus performs a very, I don't even know how we would describe this miracle. Look, any miracle is a miracle, but this is not Jesus bursting on the scene by raising the dead. This is not Jesus bursting on the scene by giving sight to the blind and making the lame walk. It's kind of, the word I'm looking for is nondescript, kind of a nondescript miracle that kind of launches him into his public ministry. And then we spent the last part of our time, and this is what I want to talk about this some more, thinking about the argument about the type of wine that was made. And any discussion of this has to begin with the language. And the language uses a single word, oinos, O-I-N-O-S, oinos. And the Bible uses this term to refer to actual wine through which a person can become intoxicated. But it also refers to grape juice, and we noted, I noted that one of the ways that helps us also understand this is when you read the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which was made in about 270, about 270 years before Christ. It was I believe the Greek Empire had this translation made. And so from the Hebrew into the Greek. And so the word oinos is used very often in the Old Testament to refer to both alcoholic wine and to grape juice. And so context has to determine usage. In other words, what do we find in the context? And look, just by way of showing, looking at, for example, look at Isaiah 16 and verse 10. Look at Isaiah 16 and verse 10. Now this is talking about the destruction of Moab. The destruction of Moab. And in verse number 10 in Isaiah 16 it says, "Gladness is taken away and joy from the plentiful field. In the vineyards there will be no singing, nor will there be shouting. No treaders will tread out what? Give me the word. No treaders will tread out what? Wine in the presses. Treading out wine in the presses. What do you put in the press? Grapes. And so, so then what gets pressed, or what is the product of the press? Grape juice. And yet the text says what? Wine. And so but the context tells us, without any question, it's grape juice. Because it's not wine when it's still inside the grape, in the sense that we think of the word wine. It's not wine while it's still in the grape, which, by the way, there are Old Testament references to the wine on the vine, or the wine in the grape. Well, obviously we know that it can't be alcoholic because, again, it's not wine while it's still in the sense that we use the word wine. It's not wine while it's still in the grape. It's not wine while it's still on the vine. There's another passage in Joel. Let me find here. Look at Joel chapter 2. In Joel chapter 2 and verse 24. It says, the threshing floors shall be full of wheat, and the vats shall overflow with new wine and oil. Now, vat would be what you would catch the olive oil or the grape juice when it was being tread or pressed. So new wine is used here. Obviously, it has to be grape juice. There was a passage. This is the craziest thing. Day before yesterday, a friend of mine in Kenya, Mofat Kabeti, was posting some passages, and he was actually posting some passages to discourage people from the use of alcohol. And some other Kenyan, I guess, that knew him, somebody that's unknown to me, but another Kenyan posts underneath it, and he posted a passage out of Proverbs. I believe it's in Proverbs chapter 3. I meant to make a note of it and go back to it. But he was trying to prove that God approved of the use, basically that God approves of the casual or social use of alcohol. And yet the verse that he gave used the term wine coming out of the wine press. Which tells us what? He's not talking about the kind of wine that you think that he's talking about. And so context has to determine usage. Now I want to think of a couple other things with regard to this, and then look at some texts with regard to the matter of drunkenness and sobriety. But here's something I had never thought about before this week, and I don't know why I never thought about this. All right, the fruit of the vine, or the cup, when the Bible says when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, it says he took the what? He took the cup. All right. Now he's not talking about the container. I mean, there's a sense in which, yes, he's talking about taking a container. But when it talks about the cup, he's talking about what? What?
What's inside.
Yeah, what's inside. Yeah, the contents of the cup. Because he says, I'm going to drink the cup, right? As often you drink this cup. All right, so he's talking about the contents of the cup. Now, here's a thought that had never occurred to me before, and I don't know why. About what time of the year was Passover? About what time of the year is Passover? Not quite spring. Possibly prior to what we call the spring solstice, but generally speaking, from about the middle of 1 month to the middle of the next month. And what 2 months are those? What 2 months? All right, let me ask you, what religious holiday falls in connection with Passover?
Easter.
Easter. All right, now, tell me, when does Easter always happen? April, sometimes March, but middle of March, middle, late March, middle to third week of April. Right? What? That's why he said spring, but I wanted the months. I wanted to get right down to the months. All right, now, anybody here ever grow grapes? I mean, I got grapes. I got muscadines, same thing, right? Let me ask you a question. Lynn, when's the last time you picked muscadines in March and April? That's right, you pick them in September and October, because by March and April, you don't even have, in most cases, you don't even have the start of the fruit, do you? All you've got is leaves and vine growth. Now, if Jesus instituted the Passover using the cup, speaking of the contents of the cup, and he did it in March and April, and it had been how long since they'd probably had the grape harvest? From October to April? Then we can understand that they knew how to keep those things, right? And that they could keep those things without them fermenting. By the way, these things are well documented. Plutarch and other early historians spoke about the ability and the quality of what they call the quality of wine, insofar as that the wine that does not inflame the senses is always better. Well, what kind of wine would that be that does not inflame the senses? Well, it'd be grape juice, right? And so it just hit me. Jesus instituted the Passover in the spring, which means it had been 7 months. It had been 7 months since the grape harvest. And he instituted the Lord's Supper. And by the way, while I'm on this, because this is a segue into another Bible truth. The word oinos is never, ever used in regard to the Lord's Supper. Ever. It's never used. About 30 years ago, when I was in Arizona, working with the church there, I heard two of the members talking, and one of them was basically trying to defend the social use of alcohol by saying that Jesus used alcoholic beverages to institute the Lord's Supper. And here's what he said. He said, if Jesus said use wine, then it's all right to use wine. But guess what? Guess what Jesus never said? What did he never say? Never said use wine. How did he refer to it? What is it? The cup or the fruit of the vine. The cup or the fruit of the vine. Now, I think there's something to that. I've been to churches that use alcoholic wine in their communion cups. I remember the first time I was about 13 years old. I even tell you where I was. I was in Metropolis, Illinois. And if anybody from Metropolis is watching this and you still do it, you need to stop. A 13-year-old kid has no business drinking alcoholic wine. I mean, listen, I like to choke to death. I mean, think about it. If you're not expecting that, you're looking in this cup and you've been drinking grape. I've been a Christian a number of years, a handful of years, and you get you a big mouthful of that mess, because most of us don't swish it around in our mouth, right? it's straight down the gullet, right? I like to choke to death. It was unbelievable, yeah. Of course, my butt, here's the thing. The people I was visiting were members there, and they all knew, but they didn't tell me. So they just got a big hoot out of it. You know, they thought, and I guess there's a sense in which it was humorous, all right? But I want you to think about something. Why would anybody do that? Why would anybody do that? There's no, first of all, there's no justification for it in the Scripture. In other words, there's not a linguistic argument to be made for it. Secondly, what would you say to a man that had overcome an alcohol addiction, who walks into a church building and gets a mouthful of alcohol in a church service? That'd be a problem, wouldn't it?
Well, I know of a man that was a alcoholic that told him that it was alcohol that he straightened up.
Yeah, I mean, think about, just think about that as a problem. But there's no linguistic argument to be made for it. In other words, there's no textual argument to be made for it. And again, the words that Jesus used were specific. I think the timing of the Passover is also helpful to us. And so it was just something that I got to thinking about, that because there's no excuse for it. You know, when Bill Burke and I went to Rome together back in whatever year it was, 2000 and maybe 11, I can't remember. We were on our way home from Africa and stopped for a couple of days in Rome, and we were going to be gone on a Sunday. We searched high and low all over the city of Rome, and we couldn't find grape juice anywhere. Couldn't find it. Every little old bodega, little corner store, every market, everything, all they sold was wine. Couldn't find grape juice. Now, I'm not saying it didn't exist anywhere, but we spent the better part of 2 hours walking the streets into every little old corner shop and grocery looking for grape juice for our worship center. So you know what we ended up doing? What did we do? Bought some grapes and mashed them up in the hotel cup. Had 2 hotel cups, and we each put some grapes in there and mashed them up so we could have grape juice. So, now look, if that was all we could have got our hands on, I guess you could make an excuse for it.
I would.
Well, I understand, and look, listen, I get it, Jimmy. And by the way, if conscience would get you on a matter like that, I get it.
I made a promise 10 or 11 years ago that I'd never drink drunk. That's what I had. I don't think the Lord would want everybody being tore up. You know,
I get it. Which, by the way, when Rhonda and I went to Rome, the church used alcoholic wine. The church used alcoholic wine, yeah. We attended an Italian-only speaking service. But fortunately, we had somebody there sitting next to us that was translating for us, whispering while the singing and preaching was going on. But we did the best we could with what we had. But in today's time, there's no excuse for it. I mean, there's just, I just can't see it. And I guess the older I get and the more I've seen the ravages of alcohol and what alcoholism does to people, it just bothers me more and more that people in the church would potentially cast a stumbling block in front of a brother or sister in the Lord. All right, so the water to wine argument is yeah, Bub.
Why do you think the church of Corinth
Use what?
wine?
Wine?
Yeah, did Paul ridicule them for getting drunk and when partaking of the Lord's Supper?
I think the word there is similar to the word in John 2.
Yeah, I thought it said that he got on for being drunk.
well, I think, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's in 1 Corinthians 11. It's in verse number 21. And the word there could mean similar. And I haven't looked at this particular word in a long time. It's similar to the situation in John 2, where the master of the feast said, or the text says, they were well drunk. They were well drunk, which means they were full. Yeah, they were, because see the contrast is hunger. One is hungry and the other is drunk. I think, first of all, the word can mean satiated, like it does in John 2. I'd have to look at it. I'm just going off the top of my head. But secondly, it's a contrast, and may well be hyperbole, because it was not unlike Paul to use hyperbole in matter of fact, he used hyperbole repeatedly, well, with regard to the Corinthians, and so it may be a hyperbolic statement. Living with me, you should know well statements of hyperbole, especially when it comes to Wendy's in South Jackson. They forgot my Frosty one time, and I got aggravated, and I said I was going to go back and burn that place to the ground.
What do you think it's referring to, like in Luke 1, where he's talking about, it's basically a precursor to John, and he talks about, and this, of course, not be, but, John's not going to drink any wine or any other fermented drink.
Right.
Why would it just say any fermented drink?
Why?
Yeah, because, unless you're contextually saying wine is fermented, then, or you're using wine in 3 different categories.
Well, in that case, you're talking about 2 different types of fermented. Wine and strong drink are different in the sense that wine is different than, say, whiskey in its origin.
Any other fermented drinks, but if wine wasn't.
Well, but I think the word strong drink refers to what is distilled, and wine is.
Or just anything actually fermented, because you make mead from honey, you make ale from wheat and grain.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think and it could just be a form of parallelism for emphasis.
He was a Nazarene, was he not?
Who?
John Baptist. Didn't that take the Nazarene vow?
No, I don't. That wasn't it wasn't the Nazarene vow. It was a Nazarite vow, and those are not the same. Jesus was called a Nazarene because he was from Nazareth, but the Nazarite vow was a different thing. Although he could have taken a Nazarite vow, but it. Right. Yeah. But off the top of my head, Luke, that's what I would say, is because it's referring to 2 different types of intoxicants, one being wine and the other. And by the way, the Old Testament also makes that distinction. I had some passages I was going to mention, like out of the book of Proverbs, where wine is differentiated from strong drink, and I think this just drawing from previous study, that the alcohol content of strong drink as a general rule was far greater than the alcoholic content of fermented wine, because the wine that we produce now that has about 13% alcohol, 10 to 13% alcohol, by volume, it's made to do that. In other words, there are things added to it to increase the alcohol content, as opposed to just taking some grape juice somewhere and setting it off to the side and letting it do its thing.
It will.
Yeah, it will, but it won't make
If
30.
there's enough sugar content, there's enough wild yeast in the air to settle on it and kick it in.
Yeah, but what they make has things added to it to increase the alcohol content, as opposed to what somebody. And even if you're making homemade wine, you're going to add sugar to it, and the purpose of that.
That just makes it work faster, because if they put it in anything that previously had wine in it, there would have been residual left over that would have caused it.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
those skins.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about John. That's good.
That was another one,
There you go.
Sorry. I'm not gonna lie to you.
All right, any other thoughts? All right, as we close out, as we move toward, we're fixing to run out of our class time, and I want to just kind of tie this thing up. And I'm going back to kind of the social aspect of the alcohol use. One of the things that we can learn about the social use of alcohol is how the Bible how it's contrasted or presented in the text. And Proverbs is one of those key texts or key sources for us as we think about. You think about Proverbs 20, and this is where my mind was going, Luke, with regard to your question. It says, "Wine is a mocker, and strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived thereby is not wise." See, there's a distinction made, which may just be a distinction in the source. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging. That's Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Proverbs 23, beginning in verse 20. Do not associate with wine bibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. Verse 29, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red and sparkles in the cup and swirls around smoothly, for at the last it bites like a serpent, stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, your heart will utter perverse things. You'll be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or one who lies at the top of the mast. Can you imagine that, being at the top of a mast on a boat? Man, that'd be, yeah. It says, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake that I may seek another drink? And also, like in Ephesians 5 and verse 18, there's the contrast of being drunk with wine versus being filled with the Spirit. There are various admonitions to sobriety, nephilos, with regard to the New Testament. There are, look, the Bible does give legitimate uses for alcohol, but it's always as medicinal. 1 Peter 5:23, Paul wrote to Timothy, a lot of your renderings there will say, drink a little wine. But the word there is different than the word generally used for drink. It's a word that means to use, take. You don't drink medicine, you take medicine, or you use, hopefully, use medicine. And it says, for your stomach's sake and your oft infirmities. Old Testament speaks of giving strong drink to him who is dying. Basically as a means of pain, to solve the pain problem. It even, by the way, it even speaks of, because I want to be fully forthright, it even speaks of giving strong drink to those who are filled with sorrow. And again, the intent there is to help somebody rest. It's like, I can't, in my line of work, I've seen it a lot, and I'm not saying it's bad, but what I'm saying is I've seen it a lot where, doctors give grieving mothers, sleeping pills or some type of shot, to help them rest, because they can't calm down, they can't rest. That's that'd be the modern equivalent to what is used in the Old Testament. So there is legitimate medicinal use for alcohol. Even today, there's legitimate medicinal use for alcohol. I think didn't they used to give a guy alcohol before they pulled his tooth? Yeah, or you can rub it on baby's gum. Jeffrey got several doses of alcohol as a baby. What's that? Is that what that is? Is alcohol in that?
That's where my therapist said my problems are.
Yeah, well,
Jeffrey's downfall.
Jeffrey had terrible allergies as a kid, and he could never break a cough, couldn't breathe, and you'd get him a little thing of honey or some type of apple juice, and with a small dose of whiskey in it to help him sleep. And look, better you have trouble than your mother, because I had to live with her a lot longer than I did you. But there's still legitimate use for such, even in today's time. So, but the repeated biblical admonitions to sobriety is one of the key things. What does the Bible have to say about drunkenness? Nothing good. All right. Next Sunday we will. Let's see. We'll do the questions and then move into lesson plan 14. We'll run through the questions at the end of 13, start in lesson plan 14. You should have 14 and 15 in your book.